For 22 years, a barber in South Atlanta cut hair for free. Every Saturday morning. Every child who couldn't pay. He never kept a record. Never put up a sign. Never told a soul. Then one Saturday he didn't open the shop, and by Sunday night 300 people were standing outside his door. His name was Theodore Gaines, 58 years old, widower. One shop, 2 chairs, a floor that slanted just enough to make new customers grab the armrest when they sat down. The shop was on Pryor Street, wedged between a laundromat and a cell phone repair place that had been going out of business for 11 years. The sign above the door said Gaines Cuts in black letters, the paint so old the G had started peeling away from the wall like it was trying to leave. Theodore had bought that building in 1999 with money his wife Cora had saved, dollar by dollar, working double shifts at Grady Hospital before the aneurysm took her at 41. She never got to see what he made of it, but he thought about her every day when he unlocked that door and every day when he locked it again. The shop smelled like clove oil and barbicide and the faint ghost of the sweet potato pie his neighbor Mrs. Hewitt used to bring him on Fridays before she passed. It smelled like a place that had been lived in by the same person for a very long time. Like a life. Theodore did not become a community legend on purpose. That was the thing people later struggled to explain about him. He wasn't performing generosity. He wasn't angling for recognition. He just had a rule, the same way some people have a rule about locking doors or saying grace. If a child walked into his shop and the mother checked her wallet twice and looked at the floor, the haircut was free. No announcement, no ceremony. He just finished the cut, spun the chair around so the boy could see himself in the mirror, and said, "You look sharp, young man," and moved on to the next customer. He never said, "I'm not charging you." He just didn't. The mothers always knew. They'd reach for their purse and he'd already turned away to sweep, and they would stand there for a moment, holding money they needed for other things, and something would cross their faces. Not relief, exactly. Something older than relief. Something that doesn't have a queen name. The children had no idea. They just thought Mr. Gaines was the barber who made them look good and talked to them like they were grown. That mattered more than anyone realized. Theodore grew up in a 2-bedroom house in Mechanicsville with his grandmother Estelle Gaines and 4 cousins. His mother was alive but not present, which is a specific kind of absence that doesn't show up in any official paperwork but shapes a person down to their bones. His father was a story his grandmother told in the past tense when she was tired and her guard was down. Estelle worked as a house cleaner. She left before 6 and came home after 5, and somewhere in between she managed to raise 5 children who were not hers and never once made them feel the difference. She kept the house clean and the refrigerator stocked with the basics, and she had a rule about Sunday mornings. Everyone came to the table, everyone ate together, no exceptions. But the thing Theodore remembered most about his grandmother was not the food or the cleanliness or even the Sunday mornings. It was the way she cut his hair. She couldn't afford a barber, not regularly. So once a month she sat him on a stool in the kitchen with a towel around his neck and a pair of scissors. She sharpened herself and she cut his hair the way she did everything, with total concentration, with steadiness, with care that felt deliberate, like she was telling him something with her hands. "You are worth taking care of." Every cut said it, every straight edge, every time she held his chin and tilted his head just so. Theodore was 11 when he understood that a haircut was not just a haircut. It was a message. It was someone saying, "I see you. You matter. How you present yourself to this world matters, and I am going to help you do it right." He never forgot that. He went to cosmetology school at 23 on a community college scholarship. He worked in 3 different shops before he saved enough to lease his own chair. He married Cora at 27, lost her at 36, and buried something in himself at her funeral that he never fully excavated, but he kept working. The shop was the one thing that made sense when nothing else did. And every Saturday, quietly, without telling anyone, he made sure that any child whose mother counted her dollars twice went home looking like somebody took care of them. For 22 years. More than 2,000 children if he tried to count. He never tried to count. But somewhere in year 15, something started changing in Theodore's body. He noticed it first in his hands, a stiffness in the mornings that took longer and longer to shake loose, then the fatigue, Not the regular tired that came from standing on your feet all day, but the kind that sat behind your eyes and didn't move no matter how much you slept. His appetite went strange. Food started tasting like it was wrapped in something, like eating through a thin cloth. He didn't go to a doctor. He had insurance, barely, the kind with a deductible so high it functioned more as a philosophical statement than actual coverage. And besides, he told himself, he was 54, then 55, then 56. The body talked more at this age. That was just what happened. He kept cutting. By year 21, he started sitting on a stool between customers instead of standing. His hands still worked. His eye was still precise, but his legs ached from ankle to hip by noon, and by closing time on Saturdays, he could barely make it up the stairs to the apartment above the shop where he'd lived since Cora died. He told no one. There was a boy who came in every month, name of Devian, 9 years old, came with his mother who worked 2 jobs and had the eyes of someone who was tired all the way through. Every month, Theodore cut Devian's hair, and every month Devian left looking like the kind of child who had people in his corner. That was the point. That was the whole point. Theodore didn't know what Devian would become. Didn't know if the boy would carry any of this forward. He just knew that a child who feels seen stands differently, walks differently. That posture, that quiet confidence, it doesn't come from nothing. It comes from moments, small accumulated repeated moments of someone saying, without words, you are worth this. He had been that child on a stool in his grandmother's kitchen. He knew what it felt like to have someone's hands say it for them. He kept cutting. He just stopped standing up straight while he did it. In the spring of what would turn out to be his last year of full operation, a man came into Gaines Cuts for the first time. He came in a car that cost more than the building he was parking in front of. His name was Preston Caulfield. He was a real estate developer, one of those men who moved through Atlanta with renderings under his arm and a phone that never stopped buzzing and a look on his face like he was already past wherever he currently was. He sat in the chair because someone had told him Theodore was the best barber on the South Side, which was true. And he wanted a good cut before a meeting downtown. He wasn't there for any other reason. Theodore cut his hair, and Preston watched in the mirror, and at the end he said, "You're good, really good," like he was surprised. "Thank you," Theodore said. Preston looked around the shop, at the slanted floor and the old chairs and the magazine rack, with magazines from 2019 and the photograph on the wall of Cora at 29. Smiling in a yellow dress, which Theodore had put there the week she died and never moved. "You own this building?" "Yes." Preston named a figure. Just like that, the way people say things when they are accustomed to numbers not having resistance. Theodore didn't respond right away. He folded his towel and set it on the counter and looked at Preston in the mirror. "It's not for sale." Preston said the figure again, higher this time. "Still not for sale." Preston left a card on the counter when he paid. A nice card, the kind with raised lettering. Theodore put it in the drawer with the rubber bands and the spare clipper guards and didn't think about it again. But Preston did not stop thinking about it. 3 months later, a letter arrived. Official stationery. City development language. The block had been rezoned. Plans had been approved. There would be a mixed-use development on Pryor Street. Theodore's building, his building, was in the footprint. The city had the right to acquire. Theodore read the letter at the kitchen table upstairs. He read it twice. Then he set it down and looked at Cora's photograph, the one he kept on the kitchen counter, smaller than the one downstairs, taken on the same day in the same yellow dress but a different angle. And you could see she'd been laughing at something just before the shutter clicked. He said out loud to nobody, "I don't know what to do, Cora." The apartment was quiet in the way apartments are quiet when you've lived in them alone for too long. That same week he finally went to a doctor, not because of the letter just broke something open in him that had been sealed for a long time. He went because he was sitting in the barber chair and his vision went gray at the edges for 45 seconds and he thought, very calmly, "Oh, this is serious." The doctor was a resident, young, efficient, not unkind. The blood work came back, then more tests, then a specialist. The specialist said the word that Theodore had been not saying to himself for 2 years. Congestive heart failure. Not a sudden onset situation. The slow kind. The kind that builds while you're looking the other way, while you're standing on your feet all day, while you're climbing stairs on legs that hurt, while you're telling yourself you're just tired. You need to significantly reduce physical exertion, the cardiologist said. You should not be on your feet more than 2 to 3 hours a day. You should not be lifting. You should not be under sustained stress. Theodore looked at her. I'm a barber. She looked back. Mr. Gaines, if you keep working the way you've been working, we are talking about a serious cardiac event within the next 12 to 18 months, possibly sooner. He thanked her and drove back to Pryor Street and opened the shop and cut 4 more heads of hair that afternoon because it was a Tuesday and he had appointments, and that was what Tuesdays were. His hands shook a little when he held the clippers. Not much. Just enough that he knew. He didn't tell anyone. He had no one to tell. His cousin Marcus called from Memphis sometimes, but they were not close in the way that allowed for this kind of conversation. He had customers who had become something adjacent to friends over the decades, but there was a line, and Theodore was a man who stood on one side of it. The shop was his. The people in it were his, in a way. But the weight was his alone. He started closing early on Wednesdays. Then he started sitting down between every client, not just the long ones. He stopped taking walk-ins after 2 in the afternoon. He kept the Saturday mornings. He kept the children who couldn't pay. He stopped being able to keep everything else. The last Saturday he opened, he cut 7 heads of hair. The 7th was a boy named Isaiah, 8 years old, gap-toothed, came in with an aunt who had 3 kids of her own and was watching him for the weekend. The aunt found the price board and the look crossed her face, that particular look, and Theodore was already turning away before she finished finding her wallet. Isaiah looked in the mirror when the chair spun around. I look clean, he said, with the solemn confidence of a child who has just discovered something true. You look sharp, Theodore said. That night, climbing the stairs, Theodore had to stop on the 4th step and hold the railing with both hands for a full minute while the pressure in his chest made itself known in a way it hadn't before. He made it to the top. He sat on the edge of his bed. He looked at Cora's photograph. He didn't open the shop the next morning. He didn't leave a sign. He didn't call anyone. He just didn't open, for the first time in 22 years, on a Saturday morning. By 10 o'clock, 3 regular customers were standing outside. By noon, the word had traveled the way words travel on Pryor Street. Through text messages and front porch conversations and the hair salon, 2 doors down, were Ms. Monis. Yvonne knew everybody's business and kept it mostly to herself, but not entirely. Something is wrong with Mr. Gaines. By Sunday evening, the block knew. And not just the block. There was a man named Devian, not the 9-year-old Devian, not yet. There was a man named Devian Marsh who was 31 years old, who worked in the IT department of a hospital in Buckhead, who had driven down to Pryor Street every 6 weeks for his cut for the past 12 years, ever since he turned 19 and started making his own money, and his first independent decision was to keep going back to the barber who had cut his hair for free every month when he was a kid. Devian didn't remember the exact moment he'd realized the haircuts were free. He remembered thinking, at some point around age 12, that his mother always seemed lighter after they left Gaines' cuts. Not happy exactly, just lighter. The way someone looks when they've been carrying something heavy, and someone helped them set it down for a minute. He found out the whole of it years later, as an adult, when his mother told him. She'd been on assistance, 3 kids, their father gone, and every month she brought the boys in, and every month Theodore Gaines cut their hair without taking $1, and never once made her feel the charity of it. Devian had cried in his car after his mother told him that. He was 24. He was not the kind of man who cried often. He sat in the parking lot outside his apartment complex and let it happen, and thought about the boy he'd been and what it had meant to walk out of that shop every month looking like someone was taking care of him, because someone was. When he heard Theodore hadn't opened on Saturday, Devian drove to Pryor Street that Sunday night. He didn't have a plan. He just drove there the way you drive somewhere when you need to be close to something that matters. There were already 8 or 9 people standing outside. He didn't know most of them, but he could tell by the way they were standing. Not the way you stand outside a closed business, but the way you stand when you're keeping watch. That they were the same kind of people. The ones who remembered. He knocked on the door that led upstairs to the apartment. He knocked twice. Theodore opened it. He looked smaller than Devian remembered. Or maybe Devian just saw him differently now, the way you see someone differently when you're worried about them. Mr. Gaines. Theodore looked at Devian, and then looked past him at the people on the sidewalk. "What's all this?" he said, not alarmed, not unfriendly, just genuinely asking. "People are worried about you," Devian said. Theodore shook his head slowly. "They shouldn't be bothering themselves." "I know you think that," Devian said, "but we're here anyway." Theodore looked at him for a long moment. He looked at Devian the way he had looked at that 9-year-old in the mirror, steady and assessing, like he was reading something. Then he stepped back and let him in. That same Sunday night, Devian posted in the Atlanta South community page. He kept it short because he knew how these things worked. If you wrote too much, people scrolled past. He wrote, "Does anyone remember the barber on Pryor Street? Mr. Gaines at Gaines Cuts? He's been there for 22 years. He needs help now. If he ever cut your hair or your kid's hair and you remember why, reach out." The first reply came in 4 minutes. Then 11 more in the next hour. By midnight, Devian was reading messages that did something to him. He didn't have a clean word for, not just because of what they said, but because of the specificity of them. The details. The things people remembered. "He cut my son's hair for free for 3 years. My son is 22 now and still talks about Mr. Gaines. First man who told him he looked like somebody. I was a teenager when I moved here from Savannah and didn't know anyone. I walked into that shop scared and walked out feeling like I belonged somewhere. He cut my brother's hair the week before his first job interview. Wouldn't take a dime. My brother got the job. He still has that job. He's a supervisor now. My boys went there every month for years. I could never really afford it. He never once made me feel like I couldn't. My son has autism. Every other barber either gave up or made him feel strange. Mr. Gaines took an hour with him every time, talked to him like the rest of the world, talked to other kids. My son asked for Mr. Gaines by name. That was the first time he'd ever asked for a person by name." Devian read that last one and had to put his phone down. He picked it back up and kept reading. By Monday morning, 64 people had responded. By Monday afternoon, a woman named Keisha Trumbull had organized a group chat with 30 of them. Keisha was a logistics coordinator, and it showed within an hour she had a spreadsheet, a plan, and 3 action items assigned to specific people. Keisha herself had a reason she didn't put in the group chat, but that she thought about the whole time she was building the spreadsheet. She had come to Gaines Cuts 11 years ago, newly separated, 2 kids, the older one starting 2nd grade, the younger one starting kindergarten. She'd had just enough money to get both boys' cuts before the first day of school. She'd calculated it in the parking lot. Enough for one, maybe enough for 2 if she was careful. Theodore had taken one look at her doing the math in her head and cut both boys without discussing payment. Her older son, now 20, still remembered the first day of 2nd grade as the day he felt ready. She had never told him why. She told Devian on the phone Monday evening. "He didn't make a big thing of it," she said. "That's the thing. He just did it. Like it was the most ordinary thing in the world to decide a kid deserves to look good." Devian listened. "So now it's our turn to do the ordinary thing," Keisha said. They found out about the heart failure through a neighbor, a woman named Miss Patricia who lived on the 2nd floor of the building next door and had been bringing Theodore soup once a week for 3 months because she'd noticed he looked wrong and she was a woman who acted on what she noticed. She was 73 and had the moral authority that comes from outliving most of the things that tried to stop her. Miss Patricia told Devian when he came by Tuesday morning. She stood in her doorway in house robe and compression socks and told him everything she knew, which was considerable. "He won't ask," she said. "He's the kind of man who would rather fall down than ask someone to catch him." "I know," Devian said. "Well, then you know what you have to do," she said, and closed her door. The plan came together in 4 days. Devian handled the GoFundMe. Keisha handled the coordination. A woman named Tony, who turned out to be a cardiologist at Emory, and who had grown up getting her brother's hair cut at Gaines because her mother couldn't always pay, got on the phone with Theodore's specialist and started navigating the insurance gap that had kept him from following up on his care. The GoFundMe went up Wednesday evening. By Thursday morning, it had $22,000. By Friday noon, it had $61,000. By Sunday, it had crossed $90,000. With donations coming in from people who had never been to Pryor Street but who had read the story that someone had posted and felt the pull of it, the pull of a person who gives quietly for 22 years and then quietly begins to disappear. Tony spoke to the hospital's financial assistance coordinator, called in 2 colleagues she trusted, and assembled a care plan that covered what insurance didn't. She did it with the same focused competence she brought to everything. And she did it on her lunch breaks and after her shifts because some debts you don't calculate in time. They set a day. Saturday morning. Same time the shop opened. Same time it had opened every Saturday for 22 years. Theodore woke up that Saturday in the apartment above the shop, with pain behind his sternum that he had learned to breathe through. He made coffee. He looked at Cora's photograph. He thought about the letter from the city, still in the kitchen drawer, still unanswered. Then someone knocked on the door. He wasn't expecting anyone. He wasn't expecting what he found when he opened it. Deviant stood on the landing. Behind him, the stairwell was full. People standing on every step, voices carrying up from the ground floor, spilling out onto Pryor Street. "What is this?" Theodore said. Same words as before. Same quiet voice. This time Deviant didn't answer right away. He stepped to the side. A woman came up the stairs. She was maybe 40, carrying a boy on her hip. The boy maybe 5 years old, looking around at everything with the bright absolute curiosity of a 5-year-old who doesn't know yet that some moments are more important than others. "Mr. Gaines," the woman said, "you cut my oldest boy's hair for 3 years when I didn't have it. His name is Marcus, and he's 14 now. And he wants you to know that the reason he takes care of how he looks, his words, is because of you. He told me to tell you that." She shifted the boy on her hip. "This is his little brother. His name is Theodore." Theodore looked at the child who carried his name. The boy looked back at him with perfect unconcerned seriousness and then smiled the way small children smile, without deciding to. Theodore put one hand on the doorframe. He was a man who had been standing behind people his entire life, behind the chair, behind the counter, behind the act of giving, being stood in front of, being looked at this directly, being the reason for someone's child's name. It sat in him strangely, like light in a room that hadn't had its curtains open in years. Then Deviant spoke. He said, "We see you, Mr. Gaines. We've always seen you. You just didn't know it." More people came up the stairs. One by one, not a rush. A woman who said he'd cut her twin son's hair for 6 years and she'd gone home and cried in the car after every time because it was the one thing she could give them that felt like normalcy. A man who said Theodore had talked to him for an hour during a cut when he was 17 and newly homeless, and that hour had been the thing that kept him moving forward long enough to find his footing. A woman who said her grandson asked for Gaines' cuts by name, and it was the only place he would sit still, and she wanted Theodore to know that mattered more than the cut. Theodore stood in his doorway and listened to all of it. He didn't cry right away. He was a man who'd learned to hold things, but somewhere in the middle of the woman talking about her grandson, something gave. He cried the way people cry when they've been alone with something heavy for so long that being relieved of it feels like its own kind of grief. Then Deviant showed him the phone. He held it up so Theodore could see the screen. The GoFundMe page, the photograph someone had taken of the shop from the outside, the old sign, the chipped paint on the G, and the number at the top. Theodore looked at it for a long time without speaking. "That's for your care," Deviant said. "The medical bills, the follow-up, everything the insurance doesn't cover. Tony's handling the hospital side. You have an appointment Monday morning. It's handled." Theodore shook his head. "This is too much. I can't take this." "You don't have a choice," Deviant said, and his voice was gentle and firm in equal measure, the way Theodore's voice had always been. "We already decided." Later, After the crowd had thinned and Devian had made coffee in the small kitchen upstairs and they were sitting at the table, Theodore said, "I just cut hair, that's all I did." Devian wrapped his hands around his mug. "You cut my hair every month for 7 years when my mother couldn't pay. You never made her feel it. You never made me feel it." He paused. "I walked out of your shop every month looking like somebody was taking care of me. I was 9, 10, 11 years old. I didn't have a lot of proof that I mattered, but I had that." Theodore looked at the table. "I just cut hair," he said again, quieter. "No," Devian said, "you didn't." 2 days later, Preston Caulfield came back to Pryor Street. He had seen the GoFundMe. His assistant had sent him the link, and then a news article, and then a second article, and Preston had read all of it at his desk in a building that had a rooftop terrace and a view of the skyline and had cost, fully developed, $112 million. He walked into the building on Pryor Street through the door that led upstairs and knocked, and when Theodore opened the door, Preston Caulfield looked at him with an expression that had not been in his face the first time he sat in that chair. "I owe you something," he said. Theodore waited. "I looked into the city acquisition more carefully," Preston said. "There's flexibility in the footprint. My lawyers found a way. The building can stay." Theodore said nothing. "I want to buy the air rights above it," Preston continued. "I'll pay you market rate, which is more than the acquisition offer. You keep the building. You keep the shop. I build above you, not through you." Theodore looked at him. "Why?" Preston paused. It was the pause of a man not accustomed to being asked that question or not accustomed to answering it honestly. "I've been in real estate for 23 years, he said. "I have built a lot of things. I have not built one thing that matters as much as what you've been doing in this building." He held Theodore's gaze. "I would like to not be the man who tore it down." Theodore looked at him for a long moment. Long enough that most men would have said something to fill the silence. Preston didn't. "All right," Theodore said. He shook Preston's hand. Preston left. Theodore stood at the window and watched the car pull away, and then looked up and down Pryor Street. The laundromat, the phone repair place that had been going out of business for 11 years, Ms. Braun, Patricia's building next door, the tree at the corner that had grown up through the sidewalk and cracked the concrete around it, and nobody had ever cut it down because, by the time anyone thought about it, the tree was already too established to move. He had a building. He had a plan for his care. He had something he didn't have a word for yet, the knowledge that for 22 years he had been seen by more people than he ever knew, that the weight he'd been carrying had never been as private as he thought. On a Monday morning in October, 3 weeks after his first cardiology follow-up, the medications were working, the swelling in his legs was down, his hands had stopped shaking. A young man walked into Gaines' Cuts. He was maybe 20, thin in the way young men are thin before they've grown fully into themselves. He had a pair of good clippers and a case under his arm, the kind you buy when you're serious, and he stood in the doorway of the shop and looked at Theodore with the directness of someone who has rehearsed what they're going to say and is now deciding whether to say it. "My name is Jerome Aldridge," he said. Theodore nodded. "Come in, Jerome." Jerome came in. He stood in the middle of the shop and looked at the 2 chairs, the mirrors, the photograph of Cora on the wall, the slanted floor. "My grandmother used to bring me here," he said. "Every month, starting when I was 6. She told me you never charged her. She's gone now, been gone 3 years, but before she passed she told me something." He set the clipper case on the counter. "She said the reason she could keep going some of the hardest months was knowing that on the last Saturday she could bring me in here and I would walk out looking like somebody. She said that was the one thing that felt like normal, like we were just regular people living a regular life." Jerome looked at the clippers in the case. "She told me if I was ever going to learn to do something with my hands, I should learn from you." Theodore was quiet for a moment. "Can you cut hair?" he asked. "I'd been teaching myself for 2 years." "Show me." Jerome looked around. "There's nobody in the chair." Theodore pulled off his cap and sat down in his own chair and turned to face the mirror. "There is now," he said. Jerome stood behind him. He opened the case and took out his clippers the way someone handles something they've invested in, carefully, with awareness of the weight of it. He looked at Theodore's reflection. He took a breath. He cut. He was good. Not perfect, but the hands knew what they were doing. There was patience in his technique, a steadiness that couldn't be fully self-taught. Some of it was native, some of it was hours of practice. All of it was genuine. Theodore watched in the mirror without comment until the cut was finished. Then he said, "Your transitions need work." "I know," Jerome said. "Your angles are good. You have a feel for it." Theodore paused. "Come back Thursday. We'll work on the transitions." Jerome looked at him in the mirror. "Just like that?" "Your grandmother brought you here every month for years," Theodore said. "I don't remember her face, but I remember those kinds of mornings. I remember what it meant to have a place that felt like normal." He turned the chair so he could look at Jerome directly, not through the mirror. "You want to learn? Come back Thursday. You work, you learn, and when I'm not able to be on my feet as long, you keep this shop open. That's the deal." Jerome nodded. He looked like he was trying to hold on to himself. "Thank you," he said. 2 words said quietly, the way words are said when they carry more than they can contain. Theodore turned back to the mirror. He looked at his own reflection. The cut was good, actually, the lines clean. Cora would have said something about the fade. And he thought about his grandmother on the kitchen stool in Mechanicsville. Scissors that she sharpened herself. Hands that said things her words didn't. He thought about the message in the hands. He thought about how many hands he had trained without knowing it, how many boys had gone home and somewhere in the back of their minds retained the knowledge that someone had taken their time with them, how that knowledge lived in the body, how it came out later in the way you stood, the way you moved, the way you looked. A stranger in the eye. Some things you teach without teaching them. Some things get carried forward without being handed. He looked at Jerome in the mirror. 20 years old. His grandmother's hands and her persistence. "Thursday," Theodore said. "Thursday," Jerome said. Outside on Pryor Street the afternoon was doing what Atlanta afternoons do in October. The light coming in low and golden, the air carrying just the start of cool. The tree at the corner casting a long shadow over cracked concrete. The laundromat running. The foam repair place open, still somehow, against all odds. Gaines Cuts had a sign in the window now, handwritten by Jerome on a piece of cardboard, because Theodore had told him to make one. "Open. Come in." Not much of a sign, but it said everything it needed to say. Theodore stood at the window and looked at Pryor Street. The same street it had always been. The same shop. The same slant to the floor. Cora's photograph on the wall. He'd spent 22 years making sure children walked out of here looking like somebody was taking care of them. He had not known until recently that somebody was taking care of him too. He had just not been paying attention. He put his cap back on, adjusted it in the mirror, and went back to work. I keep thinking about the stool in Estelle's kitchen. The way Theodore's grandmother sharpened her own scissors before she cut his hair. Not because she had to do it that way. Because she chose to. Because to her, sharpening the scissors was part of the message she was sending to a child who needed to receive it. That's where this whole thing started. Not with the shop, not with the free haircuts or the 22 years or the 300 people on a Sunday night. It started with a woman who had every reason to cut corners and didn't. Who had 4 extra children in a 2-bedroom house and still treated each of them like they were worth the full effort. That kind of character, the decision to do right even when no one's watching, even when you're tired, even when the math doesn't work in your favor. That's not something you stumble into. It's something you build, or something someone builds into you, one small choice at a time. Theodore built it into other people for 22 years without naming what he was doing. He just turned away when mothers reached for their wallets. He just told boys they looked sharp. He just showed up every Saturday with steady hands and a shop that smelled like clove oil and the memory of his wife's laugh. What strikes me about Devian is not the GoFundMe. It's the detail that when he found out the haircuts had been free all those years, he sat in a parking lot and cried. He was 24. He'd been carrying something in him without knowing what it was. This sense that he had mattered to someone when the evidence was thin, and when he finally understood where that feeling came from, it broke him open in the best way. That's what real generosity does. It doesn't announce itself. It just quietly becomes part of how a person understands the world, and they carry it forward without realizing it came from somewhere specific. And then there's Jerome, 20 years old, his grandmother's clippers in a case under his arm. He taught himself for 2 years. He drove to Pryor Street not knowing what he was going to say. That's not luck. That's a young man who decided to be serious about something, who put in the hours when no one was grading him, who showed up with tools in his hands and honesty in his mouth. The intelligence it takes to recognize who can teach you something real, and then to go find them. That's a kind of wisdom that has nothing to do with school. What I take from Theodore's story is this: the things we do quietly, without an audience, without keeping score, those things don't disappear. They accumulate in other people. They become the reason a boy stands straighter, the reason a mother cries in a parking lot, the reason a 20-year-old teaches himself a trade and carries his grandmother's tools across town to find a man he's never met. You don't have to be rich to change someone's life. You don't have to be famous. You just have to be consistent. You have to decide who you are when nobody's making you prove it, and then be that person every single Saturday for 22 years. Theodore didn't know he was building anything. He thought he was just cutting hair. He wasn't just cutting hair.